That is amazing, Patrick. Has so much imagination and inspiration and fresh ideas and just an an overwhelming cascade of functions and textures and colors. It's just a riot of it's like a it's almost like a jungle, a primeval jungle of ideas just evolving and coming into being. Really, really great. And the cool thing about this is that we have been having this conversation for years now. With you showing me your orchestrations and participating in these orchestration challenges and being a supporter on Patreon and everything else. And you never cease to satisfy my curiosity, but lately your orchestration has just come to be so excellent and so inspired, so just really, really great. So having said all that, there's a lot I could help you with because you actually do a lot here and you give me a lot to talk about. So let's start right at the beginning with the treatment of the melody. You got this cool little twist at the end. Bum 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 ba-dum. And then you use that to jump to the next melody, the next melodic statement in another instrument. Okay, all good. So we have to talk about the reasonable balance between English horn and French horn, right? Neither of which are English or French necessarily. So the piano in horn is going to definitely be more like mezzo piano on English horn. So my instinct here is that if you really want to balance this, if you don't make some attempt to balance this, it is going to the horn is going to overwhelm the English horn. And things are complicated by the fact that you've got the presence of horn sort of sticking in the middle of your harmony here, essentially doubling what's going on the clarinets. So my instinct really is that you could cut or submerge what the horns are doing here by going down to pianissimo. And in fact, I would say, looking at the whole balance of everything that you've got here in the first four bars, excuse me, that the horns could be pianissimo throughout, right? Now, just a sort of a comment here, in that I've been telling people that they don't have to swell in the accompaniment here. And actually, swelling in the accompaniment is something that I did in my original orchestration. But I was, I'm not telling people not to do it. I'm just telling people that they don't have to do it, right? And here, I can see the logic of it, because you've got a very earthy kind of a sound here. But here's where I would argue not to do it, because the separation between the accompaniment and the melody is almost nil. Like the melody is playing through the middle of the accompaniment, right? So like the first note of the melody is an A, concert A, written E, and it is playing like right on top of these bassoons, right, and under these horns. So all the more reason for the horns to be pianissimo, I would say, even the melody, right, so that you get a blended sound of English horn plus plus regular horn, right, playing together, and they come from inside this, which shouldn't surge, right? because the melody's like right on top of the accompaniment. So if the accompaniment surges along with the melody, it's kind of buried, right? Because you don't. The other thing you do not know is how much of that melody, or excuse me, how much of the accompaniment is going to push. Like how much are the players going to feel that they need to bring out their part. You would hope they'd be listening to the other players, right? I mean, with the way that you got it now, really, it's all about horn. There's another thing that you possibly could do, and that is bring the level of the third and fourth horn down to pianissimo, leave the first horn at piano, and then bring up the dynamic of the English horn to mezzo piano. But I mean, then we get into sort of dynamic mixing. It is always safer and just cleaner to score to one dynamic and then just submerge elements that might stand out a little bit and sort of ruin the delicacy or the homogeneity of the blending. Now, it's a little unclear what you've got marked here. You've got what looks like a tie on the D, and then there's nothing above, right? So it doesn't really make any sense. If you really want a tie but two separately articulated notes on the higher voice, then it should be scored as separate voices, right? So like, let's see if this works. So I'm selecting those two notes and the hang on, and I'm gonna mark them as second voice. Yeah, see, so like if you want the bottom note to tie and you want the upper note to be two separately articulated notes, then that's what you've got to add there, right? But let me not mess with your score too much. Okay, so you continue on with horns kind of in the warm center along with clarinets, which is a beautiful combination, by the way. And then you've got your bass clarinet doubling the second bassoon here, right? And then we got some of those same elements being played by the strings. And I have to say that you really do play fast and loose with the exact harmony. Sometimes you add notes, sometimes you leave certain things out. I don't know if that was a decision or maybe just a little bit of carelessness or maybe just the spirit moved you, right, to take a certain approach. Now, I'm sorry that everything is really crammed together. I think I had to reformat your score to make it fit exactly onto this page, so apologies. All right, so going on, we've got the the kind of, you almost have a reaction da 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 dum da 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 dum in flutes and oboes, or flute and oboe, firsts octaves apart. That's kind of cool. With the second violin doubling the oboes, which is kind of cool. Keep in mind that this puts the upper flute part, if they're not playing soloistically, they will have a risk of being absorbed by the violins, the second violins, and oboe. Just basically the resonance, the body of tone that is coming from them may stifle the resonance of the flute. So probably not so much with today's orchestras, but it's still a risk. Okay. All right, and then we've got our ba 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 ba, and I like the way that you throw in these notes da da ba da 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 da, and you know what kind of clouds the functions here is the fact that you're tying over into the next bar, right? So the continuing note kind of serves to sort of, I mean, it kind of suspends or overlaps the harmony as it progresses. Doesn't suspend, that's a harmonic term, right? But it kind of tends to overlap the sense of progression in the harmony, which I'm sure that is something that you intended to do, but just be aware that it clouds the it kind of clouds what you're trying to do. Now there is a slight risk here that you've got doubling in your first violins with A2 flutes, A2 flutes, okay? And then you have got English horn playing an octave lower with no string doubling. Then you've got your second violins kind of bringing out the bum. Now, did you notice that even though you put an accent on there, it was kind of weak, right? You didn't really, like in the mock-up, you can't really hear that sort of sense of ba ba da 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 ba 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 bum, right? We can't really, it's not as clear as it could be, right? That was one of the reasons why in my in my original orchestration to this, I think I had the first violins going da dum ba bum, right, and then I had a line on top going da 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 da, right. So not only are we not slurring into this, right, but this isn't doubled by anything else anywhere else, right. So this is a place where you could have added, say, like pianissimo trumpet or something like that, first trumpet, and then just like, that could have added enough weight to this to where it would stand out more. So that was that was something that I noticed in the mock-up, and it wouldn't be so critical in a live situation, especially if the if the conductor sort of gave a come here sign to the second violinist to kind of bring that out a little bit, because of course these notes are competing with the with these firm downstrokes on the second beat from the timpani, right? Now, I do have to say that, like, if you're going to push like this, you're going to have this big push, then your harp is really going to be weak here at the same exact dynamics, right? So here's a situation where you are wisely keeping your horns down one dynamic level. Okay, that's all great. Okay, but you kind of have to mix the harps up, right? Speaking of dynamic mixing, so some dynamic mixing is acceptable. So in terms of like boosting the harp and bringing down the level of the brass, but in terms of the winds and the strings, they should work together just like you have got marked here, right? And you don't mark the melody line up, right? Which is another bugaboo, right? It's something that you should probably avoid. But in terms of the harp here, if you really want these this stuff to come out, especially like with, we've got the fourth horn sitting on the same G as the top note of this harp, right? So it's just not going to have much of a chance to be heard. And then you also have timpani interacting, going up to mezzo forte, and it's dynamic, right? So there's just really no way for the harp to compete with that kind of stuff. It might be good for the harp to drop an octave here and just mark the harp, like mezzo piano going up to forte, or even, going up to fortissimo, something like that. But just like really trying to bring it out, because otherwise it just really can't compete with timpani and with the resonance of what's going on here with the horns combined with the winds. So anyways, like you do have some, you have like the horns are supplying some notes that serve to play off of the English horn, right? So you have this kind of microcosm of what you're doing here between the firsts and the seconds, it kind of embedded in here, but it's still, I still feel like it's taking some chances there. So I'm not going to tell you not to take those chances. I'm just saying that I'm concerned about one approach where you're doubling the top line, and then the other elements are kind of shifting for themselves a little bit, that the critical elements, right? It's not so much that you have harmonic elements that are doing their own separate things from time to time, but it's more that like the elements that have to lead the music here and there are sometimes left a bit on their own. Okay, and then we have this big upsweep here in the piccolo. So I've been kind of critical about gestures that kind of lead us, like say, hey, look over there, right? They kind of go whoop, right? And your score has tons and tons of them. But the thing about it is that you have so much motion, right? You kind of disguise the, it doesn't feel overused because you don't have these big, huge setups that just kind of really lead us there or take us there. There are two, I think, that are really underlined. One is this one here, and then there's a big harp glissando, I think, that's on the next page. So, anyhow, let's move on to the development here. So, bum, 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 yeah, that's really kind of cool. And then, yeah, just the way that you have reimagined things. This score is, an adaptation, right? It's a transformation of the original material, much more so than a transcription. And for all that, it's really nicely done. Yeah, and you break things up, right? You have some doubling of certain things, and then other elements really stand on their own from time to time. So all of this delicate stuff that you're doing here in the harp is just really not going to come through unless it's handled in a different way, right? And like this little stuff, like this celesta chord is going to come through great, and this one here probably, but I mean the stuff in the harp I think is really not going to come through, especially not with mezzo forte brass here, right? So like here we have the situation where I try to say, well, try to keep keep brass balanced and everything else. Here you do not have to submerge the brass because you're not really trying for an integrated sound, right? It's really a situation where the horns are really kind of saying something, bum, right? So the dotted, tenuto staccato has a kind of sound, right? Because we have the staccato, the separated sound of each note, but you also have the tenuto sound of each note. So you put that together and you have like a kind of slightly pussyfooting, kind of bouncy, doingy, doingy, doingy kind of sound. So bringing this out, at mezzo forte, like leading to this. See, that's all nicely done. Yeah, I got no problems with this. It's a little, like right in here, as I said before, like some of the original harmony is a little unclear with the way that you've reimagined it. So you might want to, I hope that you are going to try to get this performed or read or something like that. Okay, Patrick? I have no idea how your personal career is doing and, how your music is faring out there in the world. But, wow, this kind of effort really deserves a performance of some kind. And if you are going to do that, what I would do is very carefully go through all the harmony and listen for places where you have kind of big crunches of harmony coming together in ways that are a little unclear, right? And just see if you can fix some of those things. Okay, so we've got this right in here, and this is going to be fine, right? This, see, like the flute is in its strongest register, right? A little bit of piccolo on top, maybe a little unnecessary. What's going on here in the piccolo? Okay, but the flute is going to be completely audible, right? And it doesn't need to be marked up compared to the horns here because it's in its strongest register, and the horns aren't really going to be playing all that loudly. Horns and trombones, or trumpets, excuse me. I'd meant to say trumpets and trombones for the past couple of minutes. Apologies. Yeah, but against this kind of force, the harp has absolutely it just basically has no role, right? The glockenspiel will come through, but, anytime that you combine timpani and brass in a passage, harp has basically just no chance of, it's not the same It's not the same context. I like the way you have the contrabassoon and bassoons take over the bass, right in here with a bit of bass trombone and everything else. Okay, that's really really cool. And then you have stopped horns answering. Once again, keeping the winds away from where the horns are, right? So here you don't need to, and also the horns are basically stating something really really clearly, right? But right in here, like the strings would need to be louder, right, in order to blend with what's going on right in there, right? So yeah, so maybe like I'm trying to think mezzo forte here, and then the response in the original score is pianissimo, right? I don't think you need to tweak the dynamics too much in here, but just be aware with this approach that the strings are going to get the worst of it, right? But they'll still be available. They'll still be all right. Okay, so then little gestures with the harp. All right. Now here, like this is interesting. Here you mark the harp forte, and here you have a crescendo to forte with the harp, right, which is just following everybody else. But you keep your harp at forte. And now, in the rest of the piece, though, like there are some big sweeps, some big kind of arcing arpeggio passages, and they don't do that. They don't have the harp marked louder, right? So, okay, so let's go to bum 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 bum. The only comment that I would make here is just how much do you want to mess with the, you go da 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 bum. I mean that's all right. It certainly won't hurt, right? And then you've got some contrary motion here in the brass, which I think is cool. It kind of meshes into the harmony of what's going on, so it doesn't really make a huge difference, but it's still a neat idea. The only thing that I would say here is that this is something that I've kind of counseled before. When you have heavily harmonized chorale writing like this with strings and winds, with winds and brass, along with strings really don't contribute enough. They tend to get swallowed by the sound of the other instruments when you take this approach. When you sort of have the strings playing inside the brass and alongside the brass and winds, they tend to get really soaked up, right? So, even with contrary motion and other features which lessen the effect, lessen the consequences so much, there's still the there's still the possibility that this will really get absorbed into what's going on. So, as I've mentioned before, like in a big passage like this, it might be better to have the strings just simply playing octaves. Like this line here starting with G, just play that in octaves across the scope of what's going on in all the other instruments. So starting from like high G, the same G that the flutes are playing here in the firsts, and then this line here in the seconds, and so on and so forth down the line. Because the way that it's scored right now, it really is not going to contribute a lot until you get to about right here. And then there's also the consequence here that scoring things in contrary motion, going against the main idea, and having the brass mark the same dynamic level as the strings and winds means that what the audience really is going to hear here is the brass, and they're going to hear an idea which is contrary to the original direction of the melody, of the thematic arc, right? So if you want this to merge, it should be mezzo forte to piano in your dynamics, right? And then that will solve all the problems immediately. Same thing, bring down the level of the percussion as well, right? So crescendo, pianissimo crescendo to mezzo forte. So with mallets, with what kind of mallets? hard mallets, soft mallets, yarn mallets. Well, you wouldn't want to use yarn on a cymbal, but I mean, you got to tell us what kind of mallets you want, right? Right, and then here, yeah, mezzo piano, bass drum, accent, along with everybody else means that you basically will hear the bass drum the loudest, right? So piano, a little bit of, I mean, piano with a little accent is fine, and the brass piano. And then you don't need to mark up your harp so darn loud, right? That could just be marked mezzo forte, and it'll be fine, right? And then this also could stay piano, right? Especially if you have Ah3 here. So like you've got Ah3 here, and that's playing. You're playing. It's the center octave with these other things happening here. Piccolo playing that actually 2 octaves above, and then bass clarinet an octave below. Okay, so there's an issue here. All right, and that is, I think that you used my template, which is fine. But if you were going to transfer things to, if you're going to transpose your score to C major, then maybe this should be clarinets in B flat, right? Okay. Then it's just easier on everybody, right? Instead of reading in E flat, the clarinetists are reading in D major, just like the bass clarinet here. And it's just it's the common or garden clarinet that is used to begin with, right? It's the workhorse. The B flat clarinet is the workhorse of the orchestra, right? So the A clarinets are not necessarily specialized, but they're just, they're not really justified here in, you end up with like double flats and things like that. Okay, so moving on. Part A. And this is really cool here. There's like a ba da 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 da. So you have this nice kind of raspy, rattly chord here in your horns. I thought that was very effective, along with the bassoon below. It's not balanced though, right? Like this should be. I would say make everything forte in all the other parts and have mezzo forte in your brass here, right? So just have a nice and strong like blah da 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 or da 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 da. Right, and then you can start from piano. Da 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 dun 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 dun. Right. Okay, so this is really cool. I love the way that you bring the strings back in here in an important way. But once again, like you have, all right. So this is something. Talk to me, people. Why did everybody decide to score passages like this, with the strings doubled by a wind instrument below, and kind of carrying the things, but flute an octave higher? Now, why are people doing this? Okay, it's not necessarily bad scoring, but it's sort of like saying, here is concerto for orchestra and flute playing an octave above, which may get absorbed by the texture, right? So everybody is doing this. I don't know what it is about this, not doubling the higher note here. Having the flutes sort of kind of and some occasionally other instruments just kind of very nakedly doubling the melody from an octave above, while below we have these beautiful, intense, rich colors. Clarinet doubling the strings here. You get a much more direct sound here if you have A2 clarinets doubling the first violins. Okay, but this is really cool. Just keeping the horns stopped. And you know what? I would put the plus sign over tied notes, even though like it's pretty obvious, right? That this is intended to continue on, but that is the general engraving thing, is to just keep anything that is stopped, including a tied note, just keep the plus sign over. All right. Then here, when you go back to open, you have got to, right, you got to have the open sign. If you're going to use the plus sign here, you have to mark the open sign, just like the same as the harmonic sign. And then from there on, everybody assumes it's open because that's the default, right? And the same thing would be happening here. We're assuming that this is, right? Right. Let me mark these two, right? So so that's the appropriate, right, way to deal with that. And then here, now you're going back to open, right? Okay, so let's get back to the scoring. Bum, 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 bum. We've got this nice kind of raspy, reedy color in here. Now, I'm a little dubious about English horn doubling oboe up there on that G. Yeah, you know, I don't know. I mean, it's like, okay, sure, if you want to try that color, that's fine. You end up with a kind of a very thin sound from the English horn for like the first couple of notes. And then, of course, a very generous sound from the oboe. And it doesn't really matter anyways because they're both being doubled by the tremolo first violins, right? So any kind of distinctive sound that you might get from that will be just absorbed by the strings anyways, right? So it would be better to have the oboes A2 on the top line, and then this line underneath played by the English horn, just for all that it makes any difference whatsoever, right? That would be just the easiest thing to do for an orchestra that was going to read your work. Okay. Ba bum ba ba da 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 dum. Yeah, and see, and like you have this flute kind of going above, and then the line disappears, right? Yeah, so if this is intended to just give some shine to the line, if you know what I mean, then I would say double your clarinets here. Assume that your flute is going to get somewhat absorbed into the sound, the very rich sound below, right? And then don't worry about the fact that the integrity of the line basically disappears here and then just drops down to doubling the top. That's a pretty intense doubling, by the way, the flutes and clarinets. And I see why you're just having, like, the way that you conceive this, just single winds, a single flute and a single clarinet here, right? But the clarinet is still going to be outplaying the flute right here. Okay. Then bum 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 bum. Okay, so all right, the way that you got this scored, it is really the clarinets that should be playing this right in here. And it should be A2 flutes on the top line. Because, like, this second flute right in here is basically going to disappear after the C, right? So anything below that will just get absorbed into the oboes anyways, right? So if you want a balanced sound here that will contribute equally to the upper and lower elements that you've got in here, then it really is the clarinet that should be taking the second voice right in there, not the flute, right? Especially once you get down to this D, the first player will play it, and they'll be able to hear a mixture between themselves and the second oboe, but the second oboe player might be sitting like a couple seats away from them. They won't be able to hear it, right? From their just from their own playing, right? So if that's the truth, with players who are sitting next to each other, what do you think it is like for the audience? All right. So everybody, please think about the consequences of scoring low flute parts, especially this kind of thing, low flute parts in massive textures like this, or in grouped textures. This isn't really all that massive, but we're as we've seen up to now, we've seen entries that have like a very important lines given to lower flutes in big textures, right? So try to stay away from that. Okay, then da 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 bum bum, and once again we've got sort of a naked little line played an octave higher and then 2 octaves higher, right? So, I mean, just wondering about that. I mean, it's happened so many times in this round, or in this challenge, this 2020 challenge. I'm just wondering, was there a piece recently that did that was really influential to people, or is it just a complete fluke? I don't know. Okay, so you've already said with mutes 1, 2, and 3. So we're just going to assume that continues, right? So you don't need to tell us with mutes 1, 2, and 3. So this could be completely erased, and then sense a sword. That's fine. All right. Now we get to the restatement. Bum, 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 bum. And you just really have to be aware with this really high piccolo scoring here that the sound of whistling, above an octave above the strings and more, is going to be more and more insistent, the higher you get. So going all the way up here to E flat, it's somewhat controllable, but like anything above that, like here where you're saying piano and you're going diminuendo and you're going all the way up to G, so that really intense sound of kind of a whistling sound above there, even softly, will be very, very clear, and it may not be what you want. Yeah, so here you mark 1 and 2. Oh, I see. So you reversed the positions of the first and second. I don't see why you need to do that, right? Yeah, maybe that's just a fluke. Okay. All right, so now we're back to, let's just focus on the restatement. Da 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 bum 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 ba da 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 bum 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 bum. That's kind of interesting. That you kind of, you sort of duck down and then you don't go too high. And this is really nice, what you do with the flutes here. That's beautiful. Really, really well done. And then the little touch of bassoon here. Yeah. This is just really lovely things here. I don't think you need to go to treble clef here. I think that tenor clef is fine. All right. You just really, you really have nothing that merits. I mean, F sharp, right? Even without any kind of clef change, it's not all that high, is it? Right. So, hang on. So if you must, I would say, you could just put in one of those right there. See, and it's just much more normal to cellists. I mean, cellists read treble clef all the time. It's not a big deal for them either. All right. I like the sense of motion in all of this stuff. Just like you keep it from getting boring. That's what's really, really important, right? And I love all the stuff you got here. The clarinets and octaves, and the motion of the strings here, and the touch of Glock, and those are all such cool touches. But once again, watch out for extremes, like this really high stuff here in the piccolo, right? And here, you've marked up your celesta. You've got mezzo, forte, and accents. So you know how loud fortissimo is on a celesta compared to the rest of the orchestra is mezzo piano, right? Then how loud is pianissimo compared to the rest of the orchestra on celesta? It's about like piano, right? There's really very little dynamic range. Now, celesta has its own dynamic subtleties and range within a very limited scope. Here, mezzo piano everything. Piano harp? This should be mezzo forte harp, right? Going up to, I would say, forte, if you really want this to balance. And then this glockenspiel stuff could be marked up to mezzo piano as well. Now here's the part that I was talking about, how you have harp with these arcing arpeggios that are basically the same dynamic as the brass, right? So basically it's just anything that is happening here in the brass is going to kill the harp, right? That is basically just the death of the harp. So, and the other thing too is that you've got these other really cool little touches, like the pianissimo winds going diminuendo, just kind of taking what happened before and just tailing off. That's such a really cool idea, right? But I'm just afraid that the dynamic balance here is all off, right? I mean, you would need some sensitive preparation to pull this off. And of course, the safest thing to do is just to mark down the dynamics in the brass compared to the rest of what's going on here, strings and I mean I know I'm really talking about this a lot, okay, and it's coming up in almost every single evaluation, balancing the brass downwards, right? But the thing is that this is such a sprawling piece in terms of texture, right? And so you got to get it right. If you want your textures to blend, then you just really have to balance out what they are doing, right? So, if this is all marked pianissimo, then the strings and the lower winds here have got a chance, right? But then you got this really cool stuff. Here's another thing that I'm going to mention is like several scores were not thinking about the fact that there was several of our orchestrators were not thinking about the fact that the pedal extends the sustain of the harmony that is stated in the first bar, right, of each 4-bar group, right, so that we would have gaps, just like we're seeing here. However, what's cool about Patrick's score is that Patrick has basically re-quantified reimagined what that sustain would sound like. Obviously, elements, the harmonic elements of the sustain, the more resonant, fuller parts of the chord start to die out by the time you've gone a couple of bars after even if you're holding it on piano, although it does stay present throughout. So Patrick has reimagined this with this really cool idea of like these trills, these low trills on cello, right? And then just little intervals played by different instruments here and there, right? So it's all fine, but what I would do here, Patrick, is I would tail off, right? I would have these elements get softer, right? Just mezzo piano and then diminuendo, and then restart the dynamic, right? So piano. All right, so that is those are the general problems here, right? So I would say pianissimo, brass, and percussion. Then piano against the mezzo piano of the other elements, right? And then mezzo piano against the mezzo forte of the other elements, and so on. If you see what I mean, right? And here you have a strange thing. You have heavy dynamic mixing here. Mezzo forte on the timpani, which is really going to overwhelm everybody else's mezzo piano and piano scoring, right? So it would really be better for this to crescendo to mezzo piano and then have the brass marked piano and everybody else mezzo piano, right? So that's just the simplest way to take care of it. And also, I would put in some hairpins here with your harp. Just have the harpist go somewhere dynamically. So, crescendo, diminuendo every single time, right? Now, if you mark it that way, then if this is piano and the brass and percussion are pianissimo, then the harp has got a chance. And then I think you preserve more of the elements that you want here. So now we've talked about that. Let's talk about the melody finally. We've got da 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 da. Now this could be marked up to piano. I feel that wouldn't hurt anything. Octaves. Basically, it's playing in unison with a viola, but I think you would want a more horn kind of sound, right? So it would be a horn plus a little bit of viola cushioning, and then bass clarinet an octave below, right? Yeah, and then let's just focus on the melody, the melodic treatment. I'll come back and talk about the little cascading bits in a second. Then we've got clarinet plus English horn, unison with second violin. That's fine. How come no hairpins? Ba 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 bum, ba 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 bum. Right? We're not seeing we're not seeing that, and we're not even seeing it here. Even though you've got crescendos in your brass and you got hairpins in your clarinets, what's going on with the melody? Here you've got these beautiful octaves as well, right? And you're reserving some of your upper winds for doing these other little gestures and stuff, and so we don't have anything to thicken what's going on here. So I'm afraid the way that this is scored, that even just these soft elements in here may get more attention, right? And the cascading harp may get more attention than the actual melody itself, right? So your piccolo player isn't doing anything, right? Your flute player isn't doing anything until beat 3, right? Maybe you could throw in some things, or maybe you could have oboe, right? Oboe below, piccolo above. That's a very beautiful, solid combination. Really nicely reinforces the strings. Okay, and now we're back to doubling in the winds, and it just that is even more of a question is why there isn't doubling here, right? Where it needed it the most, and it was at the strongest, right? The especially against all that brass, even marked down a dynamic level, right? Okay. And then I'll talk about the ending in just a second, all on its own. All right. So let's go back and talk about the cascades. I think that it's a little cutesy to go every single time, like maybe the first time or maybe the second time, right? But every single one going it's, it's a little bit like, many pieces from Europe called Dance of the Elves or Dance of the Sprites or March of the Dwarfs or something like that. Do you know what I mean? It has that quality to it, which I feel is a little antithetical to the building sense of anticipation and reverie in Lili, right? She is preserving this moment forever in her soul, right? And she's going to go home and she's going to write this piano piece, right? Or she's going to, I don't know, she is at home, we have to assume. She's going to walk back to her room and write everything down, probably at the Villa Medici, where she actually composed this. Right? So I feel it's just a little much, right? I mean, there's not to say that that's in poor taste or anything like that. I'm not going after you and your taste and anything like that, Patrick. I'm just saying that it's just, I feel it starts to distract from the meaning of the piece to add that much icing. Okay, so this is kind of cool. What's interesting about this is that in the piano score we have cascading that gradually builds. Not only in sort of in interest, but it also builds in height, right? So you're actually starting off fairly high with your first two statements here. Okay, and then you drop down actually, which is kind of an interesting thing. The flutes are playing lower with the clarinets under them now, right? And then we've got brass coming in, and here I feel especially like the brass needs to be marked under. So if the cascades are piano in strings and winds, the brass have got to be pianissimo, right? Because otherwise they add a little bit too much, and I don't think that they need to crescendo at the end. Okay, because this isn't building towards this, right? I mean, you are actually doing that. You're going yum 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 bum bum da dun, right? All right, I'll give you a pass on that. But it's just, I'm not so sure about that. But I won't take issue with it. that's what you felt the score should be about, so you can leave that in, I guess. All right. And then here, we're keeping it soft and, yeah, and then the strings and oboes. Okay, so, like, the only thing that I would say about it in general is that I think that it's fine, and I think that you build variety in here by bringing in the brass. But, could there have been more variety, right? Could there have been different elements used? Could you have started lower and progress higher so that this was the highest, right? But I don't know. I mean, I really do like the approach that you've got in here. You don't really have to change anything, but I'm just, I'm not, a lot of times I'll make suggestions that are not so much about changing things than they're more about thinking about things, right? And sometimes when you score strategy A and somebody suggests strategy B, you end up coming yourself with strategy C, which might even be stronger, right? So that's why I'm just suggesting thinking about things, right? About different ways of doing things so that you make your score even stronger. Okay. Now, we're getting to the very end here. Let me get rid of that keypad. Okay. And this is really nice. I think you can just mark your everything can be pianissimo, triple P, that's all good. And I think that here you can mark this piano in both celesta and harp. No sense holding back here, right? And this is just about the highest level you would ever really want to score a harmonic, right? Seriously, folks, don't go above A, above the staff, right? And in fact, I try not to even score that, but it's still fine. A little triangle, little bass drum. Yeah, so just beautifully, delicately handled. And I really love this bum, 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 bum. Just a little bit of doubling with English horn. Okay, so here you're doing kind of a French version of niente, right? So from nothing to nothing. It's really only the clarinet that is capable of doing this. So if you really want this, then I would say give it to clarinet and bass clarinet, right, rather than bassoon. Bassoon is really not capable of doing a true niente, right? So if you want a true niente there, and here I'd say it's legitimate. It's a legitimate request because you're using it as a textural element that adds to another textural element, which is getting its own attention, right? So that's fine. I've got zero problem with it, and you could even just avoid the French here and use the niente, the little circle crescendo and diminuendo, right? So I would put my stamp of approval on that. But I would say use clarinets or low flutes where it actually nothing really means nothing. All right. Okay, so wow, there was so much to cover with this, Patrick, and the honest truth of it was that your score was so complex that to give it the evaluation that it truly deserves would have taken like maybe 3 hours or 4 hours, or I would say 4 sessions, and I would want to be with you right there, and I would want to be talking about each group of bars and really going over all the different choices and talking about the implications of certain combinations that you have got there. So that is to sort of say that I'm not going to say that I'm not completely happy with everything, but it's just that I feel there are some things in here, like especially when I was talking about like whether or not certain harmonies are true to Lili, like what choices are you making in terms of your gestures that kind of cloud the issue a little bit, and so on. All right. So, but all the same, I mean, it made for a really good evaluation for me talking about this and just boiling down everything that I possibly could to 1 hour. And I'll just reiterate one more time, the effort that you put into this deserves that this piece should be performed, that your orchestration of this should be performed. It's excellent, right? And that is not to take anything away from anybody else's efforts here that I also feel just as strongly should be performed. But, it just really does hit you in the face when you're checking something out that is this complex and has this much effort. And, and especially that this is a real passion of yours and is something that's really important to you, and it really brings a lot of meaning to you. So maybe part of the effort of being an orchestrator is also rustling up the occasional performance. So just think about that, okay? And the only thing left to say after that is just that not only am I so impressed by this and thankful for the effort you put into this entry and for what that means in sort of ennobling the entire orchestration challenge kind of thing. It also, like, I just so much appreciate the support that you have had, and your presence in the community has been so important. I know you don't always come in and comment in Facebook or or really engage as much as you used to, but that doesn't mean that I've forgotten you, or that I don't, that I take your support and your, and your presence for granted at all. Okay. So I really do appreciate that, and also helping me keep the channel going. That's so great. That's so important. So thank you a zillion times, Patrick. And please stay in the game with this, because especially the next selection that we're going to orchestrate next year is going to be just as amazing as this piece, possibly even more. Okay? All right, and with that cryptic comment, I will thank everybody else for watching, and I'm probably going to wrap up this whole thing today. I hope I'll have time. So I'll see you all soon in the next video.